So then, without further ado, I would like to invite someone who's no stranger to youth activism up to the stage. She's been working towards a green Canada longer than most of us have been alive. She's an officer of the Order of Canada, and she's the leader of our Green Party, Miss Elizabeth May.
Merci Jocelyn, thank you everybody. Bienvenue à tous les jeunes de Parti Vert. C'est le Young Greens is directly vers de jeunesse, non? Jeune Vert, c'est plus facile. Okay, so I'm very happy to be here. I don't know if you ever knew this because it was probably before most of your time in the Green Party, that one of the pledges I made when I was deciding to run for leadership was to see the creation of Young Greens. I didn't know the name of it, I just knew that we needed a youth wing. This came about, it was really pretty curious or comical how it came about. This isn't what I was asked to speak about, so I won't take too long on this little bit. But I actually decided that it was probably going to be the only way I could face all the challenges that were happening to Canada would be to leave Sierra Club of Canada, where I'd been for 17 years and which I loved, and quit my job and go run for leader of the Green Party. And I had not done anything as rudimentary as go to the Green Party website before deciding this. My daughter, who was then 14, said, Mom, I went to the Green Party website. You're not going to believe this. They don't even have a youth wing. I said, oh, that can't be true. So it turned out, and then I talked to the Greens about it, and everyone said, oh, we didn't want to have a special wing for youth because so many of our candidates are young already that it's really obvious that we are a party for youth. And I said, it's not so obvious when you look at the members of council. You know, youth engagement in an organization is judged not by how many young people you have in the trenches, it should be judged by how many young people you have in the chambers where the decisions are made. And so I'm really, really thrilled to see the progress that was made. I had youth organizers for every part of Canada for my run for leadership of the Green Party, and many of those great people, I see Darcy in the audience, still one of the ones I was there from the beginning, but a lot of the Young Greens following the leadership run in 2006 formed into a youth wing for the Green Party. I think it's extraordinary. One of the outcomes historically of the merger between the Progressive Conservative Party and Alliance, which wasn't so much a merger as a hostile takeover, one of the outcomes of that was that the Conservative Party got rid of their youth wing. Just so you know. The only youth organizations sanctioned by the Conservative Party are based on campuses and are not allowed to have an entire youth wing of the party. I think it's a vital sign of health for any institution that it be youth-focused, youth-friendly, and have in its mechanisms of governance the ways in which young people participate. It's essential. Now, what I was actually asked to talk about was something of my own background, because I became active as an active citizen consciously. I suppose I really can't count my first protest marches before I could talk. I really don't think that counts. My first press conference, I was 2. I don't think that counts. My mother was an activist against nuclear weapons testing, and she brought me along to a number to everything, let's face it. And the press conference in which, my very first press conference, I don't know how many of you know about nuclear weapons testing in the atmosphere, but through the 50s, particularly in early 60s, the US and the UK and the Soviet Union were detonating nuclear weapons in the atmosphere to see how well they would work. I mean, it was just a bizarre thing. And when a nuclear bomb detonated in the atmosphere, it would of course release radioactive byproducts over a very wide area, in fact, pretty much around the whole planet. Strontium-90 was one of the radionuclides that was distributed in this fashion, and strontium-90, when received by the human body, the body mistakes it for calcium and stores it in bones and teeth. So we had a constant ionizing radiation being emitted in bones and teeth. And when my mom was quite a young mother, she read that a lot of scientists and doctors were concerned that this constant radiation would result in bones, which is of course where leukemia starts, would result in an increase in childhood leukemia. So that's how come a young housewife and mom in the 1950s became radicalized and became an activist against nuclear weapons testing. So logically enough, because she was a mother, that was the motivation. So she brought sort of Exhibit A, the baby, to various events, including the time that she and 17 Nobel Prize winners sued the governments of the US, the UK, and the Soviet Union in an effort to stop nuclear weapons testing. This effort was successful, and the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed, I think it was in 1962, and it was certainly a successful effort of grassroots activism. But my own deliberate activism, I trace back to 1970, that being the year in which I can first remember being very active. It was I was in grade 10. In the fall of that year was the beginning of what became Greenpeace, the movement to stop the testing of nuclear weapons, this time subsurface, in an area called Amchitka off the coast of Alaska, near a seismic fault. And there was a tremendous amount of protest to stop the underground nuclear test near Amchitka. It led to, as I said, it led to the creation of Greenpeace. There was a petition that I started in my high school. Lots of people signed petitions. And spring of that year, April 22nd, 1970, was the very first Earth Day. So April 22nd, we now know is Earth Day. Probably take it for granted. I mean, this year, it was a very big Earth Day. It was actually the 40th anniversary of Earth Day. But for me, that's my 40th anniversary as a conscious choice of my own activism. It wasn't ever, see how to put this, there wasn't an effort to recognize youth as a movement in the environmental movement when I was first active. We did organize through our high schools. We did manage to put in place funding to start a citizen action committee I grew up in the States, so this was in Hartford, Connecticut. Ralph Nader challenged various communities across the US to put together something that would later become PIRGs, Public Interest Research Groups. When he first challenged this in 1970, it was to start citizen action committees, and both Connecticut and Oregon won out because we raised the money. And what I had done was I'd organized an Earth Walk back in 1970 with the 35 high schools in the area where I lived, and I'd convinced Pete Seeger to come sing. Pete Seeger, isn't that amazing? I don't know how many of you have heard of Pete Seeger because you're young. Yes, yay, Pete Seeger. So anyway, so the activism that I was doing for the most part that was an exception that was organizing within the high schools, but for the most part, everything we did and everything I was working on was in a milieu where young activists weren't particularly recognized. There weren't young movements for activists, and there also wasn't that much of an environmental movement, particularly once I moved to Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia, where the challenges were, within a few years of living there, that the pulp and paper company wanted to spray our entire island with insecticides to get rid of something called spruce budworm. And that became, that was much more significantly shaping of my life as an activist. And as a young person, again, some of you can find this. I know some of you probably have seen it because it miraculously, CBC has taken it out of its archives and put it on YouTube. But there's a debate I had. It was my first really terrifying moment on television. I'd done some television interviews long ago, but that was my sort of being outed in Cape Breton in the movement. I was working with a group of citizens. It was very grassroots. We were working to try to stop the oldest incorporated firm in the world, Stora Kopparberg, a large Swedish multinational with tons of resources. And we were so grassroots. There were some organizations of woodlot owners, some sheep keepers, beekeepers, a group that formed itself very quickly called Mothers Against the Spray, which is basically just as it sounds. No formalized environmental group existed in our area, and we didn't know of any within, anywhere. It turned out there was one in Halifax, but we'd been working for about a year before we found out it was there. And in that very grassroots, no funding kind of campaign with no computers, and this is another thing, try to imagine this. The first petition that was put out against budworm spraying across Cape Breton Island in 1975 was done on something called a Gestetner machine. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they were wheels that you had to crank with coated paper so that you could make copies of something till that stencil ran out and you started over. This was in the time, in other words, before computers, before photocopiers, and before faxes. And organizing to stop a major pulp and paper company that was threatening to shut down and put 2,000 people out of work if they didn't get their way seemed pretty daunting. And that was the context in which there's this little clip on television of me debating